Planet 14. The thing I said I was gonna talk about next. The place where... Oh, hang on. Sorry about this, guys. It appears we have an incoming transmission from the planet Mondas. The message reads as follows. The chosen chimp has unfinished business. A while back on this channel, I made two videos that I titled Horrors of Mondas, where I took a deep dive into the origins of Cybermen as depicted on their home planet of Mondas, and in these videos I focused primarily on two pieces of expanded media. The first was the Big Finish Audio Spare Parts, written by Mark Platt and released in 2002. It depicted the real-time plight of Mondas into the perils of cyber conversion in a chilling, heart-rending and profoundly human manner. If you haven't heard Spare Parts already, check it out. It's so good. And it's widely accepted as the definitive Mondas origin story, deservedly so. For my second Horrors of Mondas video, I covered another piece of media, which provided, to its supreme credit, a wholly bizarre alternative to the origins of Mondas. This time it was a comic, simply titled Cybermen, no relation. It ran across Doctor Who magazine between 1994 and 1996. It was written by Alan Barnes and drawn by Adrian Salmon, and I love the way it fuses the legacy of Cybermen with that of the Silurians. It merged the lore of Mondas being shot out of orbit with its twin planet Earth, a fixed and essential plotline in Mondasian history, with the natural disaster that caused the Silurians to hibernate on our planet, as depicted in the TV story Doctor Who and the Silurians. And that is just the tip of the iceberg on offer in the Cybermen comics. It's mind-bending, clever, meaning of course that the chosen chimp approves. After all of this, I thought I was done, so I moved on. But I missed something. And if you want to weave everything into Cybermen lore and take another view on how the Cybermen may have got started, then this thing that I missed is pretty important. Important, ever so slightly silly, and very, very intriguing. The Cybermen were originally created by writers Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis, and the last traces of their influence on this creation in TV Doctor Who was in 1975's Revenge of the Cybermen, written by Jerry Davis. However, another TV story by Jerry Davis would come to fruition in 1981. Or so he hoped. There was a story in the works, one which would detail the origins of the Cybermen in the same way that Genesis of the Daleks birthed the origin of the Daleks. Sort of. But it wasn't to be. Times had changed in TV Doctor Who. John Nathan Turner was running the show, and a brand new era of Cybermen, with a new look to boot, was soon to rock the 1980s. This arrived in the form of Earthshock, written by Eric Saward. In a lot of ways, this was a big departure from the black and white era of Cybermen established by Pedler and Davis in the 60s, and it might explain why an origin story of Mondas of the kind that Jerry Davis submitted just wasn't the thing to whet the appetites of this new team. However, Jerry Davis's creation had been preserved in what I am fast beginning to call the Book of 1,000 YouTube videos. Among all the other stuff you can read in David Banks's Cybermen book, you can also skip to the legend section at page 130 and behold, Genesis of the Cybermen. It appears as though the document in this book is a literary rendition from the original synopsis, and was written by Jerry Davis in 1986 whilst he was living in Venice, California, where he would sadly pass away in 1991. Whatever the case, this is the original Mondas origin story, predating the Cybermen comics and Spare Parts by a good number of years. And it is very different from both those things. It's pretty fantastical, playing out more like a vintage space opera story, The kind you might find in Flash Gordon or something like that, a far cry from the working class grit of Spare Parts, or the post-apocalyptic surrealness of the Cybermen comics. There is at least one small element in this that also features in Spare Parts, which I will get to in just a jiffy, but on the whole, this is a very different breed of cat. In this story, Mondas gives rise to the Cybermen as a result of a dispute within a royal family in an advanced civilization ruled by a wise old monarch named King Paulus. King Paulus had two sons, Prince Dager, a scientist, and Prince Sylvan, an artist. All seems well on this prosperous world, until... Doctor Who history is a history of rewrites. In the latest example, Russell T Davies may or may not completely ignore the timeless child story arc written by Chris Chibnall. But here's the thing, even if he does ignore it, does that mean necessarily that it didn't happen? Did you know you can support The Chosen Chimp on Patreon? For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower and request your classic Doctor Who story for review. Maybe just skim through the channel and make sure it isn't one that I have done already. And as you can see, I'm doing Cybermen stuff now, and the Daleks. Oh, the Daleks. 20 patrons, that was my target, and we're almost there. Once I hit that 20, I will cover the very first Dalek story in depth, Chosen Chimp style. But I need your help. Visit patreon.com/chosenchimp. They've changed the logo now. It used to be a line and a dot, now it looks like a weird kidney bean. And become a distinguished follower, and let's do this together. And in the meantime, let's talk about something that may or may not have happened. As the original synopsis for Genesis of the Cybermen was written and submitted to the BBC in the early 80s, we can somewhat bravely assume that the Doctor in this story is this one, Mr. Five, the Cricket Man, Captain Celery. Funnily enough, the same incarnation used to excellent effect in Spare Parts, though this isn't confirmed in all absoluteness in the case of this story. This particular version of the story was written in 1986, so it could just as easily have been this guy, Mr. Six, the Technicolor cat. He also has a companion, Felicity, described as pretty and blonde. Not a clue, not even a fandom entry for her. Some like to interpret her as Perry, as she was the companion at the time, except that Perry is Perry, and she's not blonde, and she's not called Felicity, so no. The story begins during one of the Doctor's characteristically malfunctioning TARDIS journeys, which causes him and his companion to land on Mondas. And when it becomes apparent as to where they are, the Doctor is at first uncertain as to where he previously heard the name Mondas. Really? And then this. In the Doctor's absence, Felicity, charmed by Sylvan into disobeying the Doctor's orders, brought the young prince aboard the TARDIS. When the Doctor returned for a replacement part for the regulator, Sylvan, showing off to Felicity, mistakenly activated the takeoff mechanism. The TARDIS dematerialized. Luckily, the Doctor, for once showing his complete mastery of his craft, took control and landed back on Mondas in exactly the same place, close to the royal palace. Only when the time travellers emerged did they find out that the 5-minute trip in their time had translated to 50 years Mondan time. The Doctor, Felicity and Sylvan stepped out to a greatly changed planet. Heavily armed guards immediately surrounded them and led them before the new king, Dager. Now 50 years older, Dagor finally recognised his brother and the others. He had taken over as absolute ruler of Mondas since their father's death. Lacking the skills of artistry and the emotion of a poet, Dagor had transformed the country into a soulless authoritarian state, with technological advances the only officially permitted goal. The civilization's most spectacular achievements had been in cybernetics. Dagor proudly showed off his massive plastic and metal bionic arms and legs, and his colossal strength. Not bad for a man of 75, thanks to the Doctor's zero regulator. Dagor was now ready for the ultimate transformation, the replacement of his head and trunk by a helmet, computer and chest unit. With horror, the Doctor recognised what the transformation was leading to. His memory clearing, he begged Dagor not to surrender his humanity and turn himself into the prototype of one of the worst scourges the world would ever face, the unfeeling, terrible Cybermen. Right then, so the zero regulator is something that apparently is a vital rejuvenator that keeps the Doctor alive throughout his numerous transformations. Who knew? No, seriously, who knew? I mean, come on Doctor, you picked a fine time to bring into the equation an invention that not only has nobody ever heard of, but also apparently keeps you alive, aka stops you dying during your regeneration cycles. And, well, according to this story, the gravitational pull of Mondas provided the Doctor with a rare opportunity to repair this machine, and in doing so, the technology inspired King Dagor to... You created the Cybermen, mate. Yeah, I left a little gap there just so you could drink that in. So anyway, Dagor, the first ever Cyberman, plugs becoming a Cyberman, the scariest thing ever, to his brother Sylvan, pitching to him those generic universal temptations such as immortality and conquering the universe, starting of course with Mondas' sister world, planet Earth. You get this whole tribalism thing going on then, with Dagor's lot being the technocrats and Sylvan's lot being the Sylvans. Artists once under Sylvan's tutelage now enslaved by the technocrats to serve in the malevolent king's household. The women of Mondas in particular want to live out their lives naturally rather than be cyberdized. Only one Mondan accepts the cybernetic conversion, Dagor's wife, Queen Meta. Later in the story, Dagor undergoes conversion to become the first ever fully fledged Cyberman. Despite the Doctor trying to explain to the Sylvans that Dagor did not represent the will of the majority, the plan for mass cyber conversion is underway. By the way, do you remember me talking about that tenuous link between this and Spare Parts? Well, a character labelled as Dagor's Chief of Staff and soon to be fully converted, named Krail, is also the same Krail we see in the 10th Planet. I think it's that one. You know, when the Cybermen had names and stuff. And here's what I completely missed when I covered Spare Parts the first time around. He's in that too, but going by the name of Eric Crailford. So not exactly the same type of character, but a link nonetheless, with Sylvan and Felicity apprehended at Dagor's palace, and with Dagor flexing the intent to gas and murder the Mondan populace who reject conversion and then invade planet Earth for their resources. That old chestnut. The Doctor decides to bring the fight, while Queen Meta has a change of heart and stops the full conversion of Felicity. The Cyberman army emerged from the transformation rooms in a steady stream and were lining up before Dagor. Krail entered and informed Dagor of what had taken place. Meanwhile, the Doctor and his party were entering the palace by a hidden door known to Rolf. They reached an underground laboratory filled with black canisters. Cyanide gas. There was only one thing for it now, the Doctor told them. They had to get to the spaceships before the Cybermen and force the commanders to start the countdown to launch. Back in the transformation room, Dagger arrived to confront Meta and find out where Sylvan and Felicity had gone. Furious, she refused to answer, but she was unable to keep the information from him. He read her mind. He raced to the passage, followed by Krail, Meta, and a line of Cybermen. So Dagger tries to launch an invasion fleet, and it reads for a minute like Sylvan has seized the ships with the Doctor's help and all is said and done, until there was a sad moment of farewell between Sylvan and Felicity, broken by a warning cry from the Doctor. The spaceship was surrounded by Cybermen. Suddenly, Dagger appeared, cutting off Sylvan's way to the entry hatch. The Doctor intervened, but the Cyberman sent him spinning with a slight flick of his metal hand. Dagger turned and accused his brother of being a traitor. He raised his hand to give Sylvan the lethal Cyberman chop with his massive arm. With the flash and rattle of a cyber weapon, Queen Meta shot the Cyberman king. Smoke reeking from his metal shoulder joints, Dagger crashed down, dead. Meta shouted to Sylvan to escape. The prince begged her to come home with them. She refused. As the Doctor began to come to, Sylvan ran to help him to his feet. The Doctor brushed off the offer of help and told Sylvan to go while he could. Sylvan ran off and reached the entry hatch just in time to slam it shut as Krail arrived and examined his dead king. There was a moment's confrontation between Meta and Krail. Then the Cyberman raised his weapon and cut her down. The rocket motors of the spacecraft ignited with a thunderous roar, throwing up clouds of dust. One by one, the spacecraft were launched. It's this launch, distinguished followers, that threw Mondas out of its orbit with the solar system, and that's that plot point covered. Just like it was in the Cybermen comic, only in that it was the moon that did it. So the good guys win and the bad guys remain on Mondas. Oh no, wait, there's more. The Doctor and Felicity anxiously watched the scanner showing 6 rocket ships moving towards the blue-white globe of Earth. The Doctor then turned the scanner back towards the planet they had just left. Mondas was slowly spinning away out of the solar system and into deep space. Felicity turned to the Doctor and asked if Mondas would ever return. The Doctor nodded. Yes, someday. I wish I could remember what happened. I must look up my diary. And the Sylvans? Won't they have a great effect on the Earth? Won't they change Earth history? The Doctor thought, then shook his head. The Sylvans will have an immediate effect upon the people they meet and probably leave a few artifacts around for future archaeologists to puzzle over. Then they will be absorbed into the prevailing culture and forgotten. But they will have made their contribution, never fear. The Earth people will derive a great deal from them. Sylvan and his people are part of your heritage. As it turns out, Genesis of the Cybermen is ludicrously ambitious in how it tries to plant itself in Doctor Who lore, and in doing so almost writes itself off completely. As fun and adventurous as this story is, it really doesn't fit anywhere. You could even argue that it doesn't even fit in this book, with David Banks's writings earlier on in the book describing a more cultish and dispassionate approach to cyberdization, as imposed on the people of Mondas in their early years. A culture of logic, if you will. It's nothing like this, meaning this has no real place in Doctor Who lore. Unless... It must get a little bit tiresome for them. Doctor Who writers, I mean. Because of people like me doing this. You know, they get paid to write a script, or a comic, or an audio book, or something else. And as well as having to write a good story, they're also somehow expected to amalgamate 60 years worth of history and trivia, just so there are no continuity errors. I mean, I've written quite a lot of stories in my life. Only a couple have ever been published. But if somebody came up to me and said, hey, you know that thing you wrote 10 or 15 years ago? Well, that thing that happened, blank, blank, such and such, blah, blah, blah. I'd just be like, what are you talking about? So I guess what I'm doing is kind of unfair. So the question is, why am I doing it? Well, I'll tell you. Because it's fun. This was not the first that I had heard about the genesis of the Cybermen story. The first I'd heard of it was actually in the pages of The Clockwise War, a comic book compendium which amalgamated all the issues of the Cybermen comics and colorized them, and featured a write-up from the comics writer Alan Barnes, who explained the reasoning behind his wholly unique interpretation of the history of Mondas. It's here that Barnes explained how, while he was trying to pitch a Cyberman origin story, it was brought to his attention that Jerry Davis had also tried to pitch an origin story, to no success. For those who have never read the Cybermen comic, and or those who haven't seen my video on it, let me explain that the strangest thing about this comic is that it appears to rewrite its own narrative, time and time again. Society begins, Cybermen emerge. Society collapses, again and again and again. And each time it's the same, but slightly different. And I'll say it again, it's a good job we have this write-up to explain exactly what the deal is here, as without context, this is indecipherably confusing. I am going somewhere with this. In his write-up, Alan Barnes explained that his inspiration for the end point of his Cybermen story came from the theory of a long-forgotten civilization wiped out in a global cataclysm, and that the story depicted in his comic told of cyber civilization rising and falling on Mondas in an endless cycle. Perhaps in more than one of them, Barnes said, there was a genesis of the Cybermen scenario, or something happened very like Mark Platt's brilliant Big Finish audio spare parts. I don't discount any of them. They can all be made to work with the Cybermen and each other if you squint hard enough. And keeping this in mind actually helps to validate virtually everything in this story, and also render it as credible as any other piece of Mondasian lore. It really does. The Doctor didn't invent Cybermen after all, he just kick-started one in a never-ending chain of events. The rocket propulsion most likely being one of many to send Mondas hurtling through space. The fact that they can see planet Earth from Mondas and the fact that they seem to be specifically leaving our solar system may substantiate a theory that this was one of the first Cybermen events on Mondas. Maybe the influence of wandering Sylvan on our world was lost to the annals of time, but ultimately, who's to say where in Mondasian history this really took place? In my last Horrors of Mondas video, I also postulated that the rise and fall of civilizations in cosmic repetition was a curse exclusive to Mondas because it was a planet truly lost. It was in the gravitational pull of no star. There was no orbit, no seasonal cycle, and therefore no concept of time. Just the occasional drift alongside other worlds and other stars, soon to be forgotten as their endless plight ran eternal. A world stuck in limbo, with its people doomed to the same failings time and time again, their instincts screaming to rid their minds of the terrifying truth that nothing would ever change. And the solution lay only in cyber conversion. No wonder Cybermen got started on Mondas. I still can't work out who Felicity is though, or the Zero Rejuvenator thing. You can fire away on that in the comments section. Anyway, well, I think I've rambled on enough about that. Where was I? Ah yes, Planet 14. The thing I'm definitely going to talk about in my next video. The place where... What now? Sorry folks. It appears We have an incoming message from the planet Telos. Oh, surely I covered everything on Oh, yeah. That guy. Well, alright. Till next time.